At her husband's funeral, Elizabeth nodded mechanically at faces she barely recognized. The chapel door creaked open as a young woman entered, holding the hand of a small girl. Elizabeth's polite smile froze as sunlight glinted off the child's necklace. The distinctive heart-shaped locket was identical to her own prized family heirloom. Elizabeth Walker stood beside the casket, her face a mask of composure as she accepted condolences from mourners. The weight of grief felt physical as she nodded mechanically at colleagues and relatives she barely recognized. Just 3 days ago, her husband of 10 years, Joe, had collapsed from a sudden heart attack. At only 43, he was gone without warning, leaving Elizabeth adrift in a world that no longer made sense. Just as she prepared to take a brief rest, the chapel door opened once more. A woman in her early 30s entered, clutching the hand of a small girl who couldn't have been older than 7. The child walked with her head bowed, dark hair hiding her face. Elizabeth frowned. She had never seen either of them before. Yet something about the woman's nervous demeanor suggested a connection to Joe. Margaret, Elizabeth's best friend since college, appeared at her side. She followed Elizabeth's gaze and whispered that she didn't recognize them either. The woman knelt to whisper something to the child, then hung back as the little girl approached the casket. As the child stepped closer, a shaft of sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating her small form. The light caught on something around her neck, sending a flash across the room. Elizabeth's eyes were drawn to a distinctive heart-shaped locket with intricate engravings hanging from a delicate gold chain. Elizabeth's breath caught painfully in her throat. The world tilted beneath her feet. The locket was identical to the one Joe had given her on their first anniversary, claiming it was a unique family heirloom passed down through generations. The same one, he said, that his father had crafted. Elizabeth's hand reached for her own neck, where her locket usually rested. She had removed it that morning, unable to bear the weight of memories. The child's locket couldn't be the same, yet the distinctive pattern was unmistakable even from across the room. Margaret noticed Elizabeth's sudden pallor and guided her to a private room. Once inside, Elizabeth collapsed into a chair, breathing shallowly and quickly. Elizabeth kept replaying the image of the locket. Who was this child? And how did she possess what Joe had sworn was a singular family treasure? For days after the funeral, Elizabeth couldn't shake the image of the child with the locket. She tried focusing on her new reality as a widow, but questions kept circling in her mind. The woman and child had disappeared quickly after paying respects before Elizabeth could approach them. With Margaret's help, Elizabeth searched Joe's belongings. His cell phone revealed deleted messages to someone saved simply as L. Elizabeth managed to recover the messages, which were mostly mundane but stretched back years. In his office behind reference books, Elizabeth discovered a box containing receipts for children's items. The most recent receipt, dated 2 weeks before his death, was for a piece of jewelry, a replica of Elizabeth's locket. The discovery sent Elizabeth spiraling. The jewelry receipt led them to a boutique where the jeweler recognized Joe's name. After much hesitation, the jeweler gave them the address where they mailed the jewelry. The delivery address led to an apartment building across town. Upon arriving, they discovered the apartment was empty. The landlord explained that the tenants, a woman and her daughter, had moved out abruptly, but he had kept their forwarding address for final utility bills, which he reluctantly shared after Elizabeth. Even with the address, they couldn't locate Lydia. They decided to visit the neighborhood hoping to see them. After 2 weeks, luck smiled on them. They saw mother and daughter alight from a taxi. They followed at a distance until the child and her mother returned to a small house in a quiet suburb. Elizabeth sat in Margaret's car, staring at the modest home with its neatly tended garden. She debated what to do next. With Margaret waiting anxiously in the car, Elizabeth approached the door and knocked. The woman from the funeral answered, her face draining of color when she recognized Elizabeth. After a moment of stunned silence, she stepped aside, inviting Elizabeth in. From somewhere inside the house came the sounds of a child playing. The woman introduced herself as Lydia. Her hands trembled as she offered Elizabeth a seat in the living room. Lydia explained tearfully that they had never meant to come to the funeral. It was Emily, her daughter, who had insisted on saying goodbye to her dadboy. Lydia had thought they could slip in quietly and leave without causing a scene. She hadn't anticipated Elizabeth recognizing the locket. As Lydia spoke, the painful truth emerged. Joe had been living a double life for nearly 8 years. He had met Lydia shortly after Elizabeth's second miscarriage. What began as a brief affair evolved into something more permanent when Lydia discovered she was pregnant. Joe had told Lydia that he and Elizabeth were separated but maintaining appearances for professional reasons. To Lydia and Emily, Joe was a devoted father and husband. Elizabeth listened in stunned silence, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she had mourned with this stranger who had systematically deceived 2 women for years. Elizabeth wondered aloud if Emily knew anything about the complicated situation. Lydia replied softly that she was too young to understand. Joe was a sweet father to Emily, always bringing her gifts, and the locket had been his last present to her. Elizabeth left broken. The next day, Elizabeth stood at Joe's grave with Margaret. Elizabeth spoke softly to the headstone, asking questions that would never receive answers. Her voice broke as years of fertility treatments and disappointments flooded back. All that time, while she grieved their childless future, he had been building a family elsewhere. Margaret stood beside her, offering silent support as Elizabeth confronted the ruins of what she had believed was a loving marriage. Weeks passed in a fog of grief and anger. Elizabeth moved mechanically through her days, alternating between rage at Joe's betrayal and sadness for what might have been. Then on a rainy evening, 3 months after the funeral, Elizabeth's doorbell rang. She opened the door to find Lydia and Emily standing on her porch, rain-soaked and hesitant. For a moment, Elizabeth considered closing the door, shutting out this reminder of Joe's deception. But something in Lydia's expression, a mixture of apology and shared pain, made her step aside. Inside, Lydia explained she had been struggling with guilt. She hadn't known about Elizabeth and hadn't suspected Joe's stories were lies. She apologized for everything Elizabeth was going through, acknowledging that she, too, had been Joe's victim. Elizabeth listened, surprised to find her anger toward Lydia had diminished. The worst part, she confided, was not knowing why Joe had created this deception. She shared her fertility struggles, the miscarriages, then the doctors saying it was impossible. Through it all, Joe had promised she was enough. As they talked, Emily played with the locket around her neck. Lydia noticed Elizabeth watching the child and made a surprising suggestion. She placed Emily's hand in Elizabeth's and suggested that perhaps Emily could be as much Elizabeth's as she was Lydia's now. They could, in a way, be Elizabeth's family too. With confirmation from her mother, Emily slowly walked up to Elizabeth. She looked up at her with innocent eyes, eyes that held Joe's smile, and reached up to wipe away Elizabeth's tears. Emily asked if she could call Elizabeth Mommy too, just like her mommy said she could. In that moment, something shifted within Elizabeth. The locket that had first revealed Joe's betrayal now rested between them as she embraced the child. No longer a symbol of deception, but a bridge between 3 lives, finding an unexpected path toward healing together. Did Joe's betrayal ultimately bring a strange kind of blessing to these women? Or was the cost of his deception too high a price for this unconventional family?